Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to be talking with Amanda Wynalda about land trusts. Specifically, we're going to talk about using them in real estate and how you can use them in real estate. So first off, welcome Amanda. Good to have you.
Thank you, Toby.
And let's get right down to brass tacks. How do people use land trusts in real estate? And it might be good to start with what is a land trust? Are they legal in all 50 states? That type, just kind of the basics.
Yeah, sure. So a land trust is really just a revocable grantor trust, meaning that the person who owns the property is putting it into a trust so that it's held under a different name, and they are valid in all 50 states. The term land trust isn't really what we're talking about in most states. There's three states, Florida, Illinois, and Virginia, that have a formalized land trust statute. Florida actually gives land trusts a little bit of liability protection. But in the rest of the states, we're just talking about a revocable grantor trust, just like your living trust, for example.
And so I can change this at any time. I don't set up a land trust and I'm locked in. This isn't like a land trust that you see for conservation companies or for municipalities that may be stockpiling property. This is a land trust that's used for private investors like you and me if we're buying properties, right?
100%. It's nothing that's going to get you on the IRS watch list for sure. You can change it at any time. You can restate the trust. You can change the terms. The land trusts that we draft have been crafted over years and years of working with investors and have very specific clauses in them to give power to the beneficiary. It allows you to have a nominee trustee so you can keep your name off the public record while also maintaining those trustees' powers as the minimal as possible so you as the actual property owner maintain control over the property and the trust.
All right. So you and I are both attorneys and we deal with this stuff day in and day out. But for somebody who isn't, maybe a basic of what are the people that are involved in a trust and what are their roles and how does this work? Like if I'm a real estate investor and I'm thinking, I go to my lawyer and my lawyer says, let's do an LLC. Why do we throw that land trust in there? So let's just go in order. Like who are the parties in a trust?
Sure. There's three parties in the trust. There's the trustee, the grantor, and the beneficiary. So the trustee holds legal title. The beneficiary holds equitable title. So that means the trustee is responsible for signing documents, entering into contracts, maintaining the property. The beneficiary is considered the true owner of the property. They hold equitable title. And that means that if the trust is ever sued for something happening on the property, it's the beneficiary that will be liable. The grantor is who's currently on title. So they're the person or the entity who's putting the property into the trust. For many, many of the trusts that we're drafting, the grantor and the beneficiary are actually the same person or entity to start off with. But if you own the property and you don't want the liability coming back on you, we can actually take that beneficial interest and assign it over to an LLC. And then for all intents and purposes on the liability side, it's as if that property is self-contained within the LLC. So when you're looking at a large portfolio with multiple properties, you can spread out that liability. So one lawsuit doesn't take down your whole portfolio.
All right. So a lot of people hear about, hey, you should just put it in an LLC. Why would somebody use the land trust in between the LLC? Let's just answer that one first.
Sure. So LLCs give you limited liability protection under law. They've been tested, they're tried and true in all 50 states. And that means that if the property within the LLC causes some sort of harm, so if you have real estate in it and a tenant slips and falls, or there's a dog bite, if you have like vehicles in it and get in a car accident, the liability is contained within that LLC, and you as the member or the owner or even the manager of the LLC have indemnity. You're protected from that liability. It's the same way if you look at these huge companies. If you sue Amazon, is Jeff Bezos necessarily paying you out of his own pocket? No, that's a company with liability protection. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what the LLC is for. You're wanting to keep any sort of accident, any sort of creditor at bay so that they can't get to your personal assets. And all of the damage is self-contained within that business entity.
Can I just follow up on that real quick, just to make it easy?
Sure.
So like I get this all the time. I'll have a doctor, somebody who's a high net worth person, or they're making lots of money. Maybe they're just hey, I'm just a W-2 employee and I'm making good money and I buy a rental property. And they always say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I'm like, if you own it in your name and the property, there's an injury or there's mold or somebody sues you for, you name it, some liability as the landlord, you're personally responsible, which means they can garnish your wages until you're dead, right? And then they can go after your estate. If you put a LLC around that, then they're isolated to just that LLC. So LLCs are awesome asset protection tool, but why do we throw the land trust in there too?
Sure. So the land trust gives you some anonymity. So the LLC is your bulletproof vest, and the land trust is an additional smoke screen that you can put out there. And it also protects from liability coming from the other direction. So you don't want to just be concerned about liability coming from your property and blowing back on you. You want to look at liability that you incur out there in your daily life as yourself, and you don't want that to then affect your assets and your wealth building structure. So if you're out there driving a car, get in a car accident, sure, you could be sued. You could even have a judgment against you, but you don't want that creditor to be able to reach into those other assets. One of the big things that personal injury attorneys will look at initially, someone comes into their office, they're saying, oh, my neck is hurt, someone hit me from behind. They'll say, okay, well, who is this person? Let's do an asset search on them. And if your name is on everything that you own, it's going to look like you have a lot of money and you're going to have a huge target on your back. So if you can position your assets so that they're not showing up in a search, that they're not connected to your name on the public record, then that at least gives them an additional hurdle. If that personal injury attorney doesn't see deep pockets at the end of the tunnel, then maybe it's not worth their time.
And how do I do that with a land trust? Like with a land trust, can I get my name off of that property so they don't see Toby Mathis on that property at all?
Yes. So you're actually, when using a land trust, you're actually deeding the property into the trust. So you're using a nominee trustee or maybe a Wyoming holding company as the trustee so that it's taking your name off title. It's an entity that you control still, so you still have legal control of the property. And then you're actually deeding it. So when I have a land trust, it's Amanda Wynalda, grants to 123 Main Street Land Trust. And from there, you can't tell that it's in my name anymore.
Yeah. So let's say that I'm a professional and I deal with people. Maybe you're an attorney and you're dealing with, you maybe have defendants, or maybe you're a psychiatrist and you're dealing with patients, or you're fill in the blank. And there's people, you don't want them showing up at your house, or you don't want them looking and seeing everything you own. Is it possible to use this to get my name off of everything, including my personal residence?
Oh, 100%. We use land trusts a lot for personal residence for that specific reason, for privacy. I have a client who is a doctor who's in pain management, and I don't know if you've dealt with anyone who has.
They need their oxy. They're showing.
Yeah,
I need a script, doc. You don't want them showing
yeah,
up knocking at the door at 10 p.m.
yeah. So I have a client who is a doctor. They work in pain management, and when she cuts off her patients, they are usually not very happy about it. So for privacy reasons and for safety reasons, she doesn't want her name on the public record. I have another doctor who works in plastics, and they do a lot of work in their fancy Florida neighborhood, but they don't necessarily want their patients to know that he actually lives in that same gated community. So for privacy reasons, it's 100% what we want to do for you. Is it possible to then also, the question we get after that is, well, this is my homestead. I need to have my homestead exemption, or I'm a disabled veteran, or I'm over the age of 65, and that homestead exemption gives me a break on my property taxes. The personal residence trust that we draft has specific language in it that allows you to maintain that homestead exemption going forward.
Yeah, so a trust is a fancy way of saying getting your name off a title. And the way I always look at it is, I always think of the Sears Tower when they were buying up that property. Or you could fill in the blank here too with Disney World. When they were buying up properties, they didn't want the whole world to know that this organization was stockpiling land to build a large complex, right? So because what would happen? Hey, I know they're coming to buy, and they need 100 acres or whatever it is, and they're going to be out buying all these parcels that people would hold up and they would start jacking the price up because they know that if they get half the parcels, they don't have a project. So they were buying using land trusts. Pretty simple, so that you couldn't see this was one organization. And that's the easiest way to think about it, I think, is hey,
Yeah.
they're a tremendous tool for anonymity. They work in all 50 states. There are states where there's asset protection, like you don't even need the LLC technically in Florida because there's asset protection, right?
100%.
And then are there any other benefits for using a land trust? Does it help with anything else?
It's just really a flexible tool, especially now in this real estate climate when interest rates have been climbing. We've seen a lot of people wanting to use land trusts for subject to deals. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
somebody who is locked into an interest rate from even just 3 years ago that's very low, but because of inflation, maybe they've lost their job, maybe they can't keep up with the property taxes, and they really need to get out of that situation. You don't want to take title to that property directly in an LLC. We've had a handful of clients, even just in the last couple of months, do that. And the banks are now looking back through their rolls to make sure that things haven't changed, that people haven't sold their property and they haven't noticed. And usually when you sell your property, you're getting a big check at the end. The due on sale clause in your loan triggers, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
causes you to have to pay off the loan. But if you're doing a subject to deal, you put the property into a land trust. You're From the bank's point of view, it's just going into a revocable grantor trust, just like if you were to put your property into a living trust, and they're not aware that uh, ownership has actually changed hands. So that initial property owner can walk away with their credit intact, be able to get some place to live next, and you as an investor can take over with a much, much lower interest rate, continue to pay the mortgage, not raise any red flags, and everyone's happy.
Yeah, I actually did that in, I think it was 2010. During the heart of the recession, there was a gentleman, he and his wife were going through a divorce, and here in Las Vegas, came in and bought the property. They had a Bank of America loan on there that was sub 3%. It was just such a great loan, and and there wasn't any credit anymore, so it was like the last thing they, you know, hey, they're gonna sell it, and they were willing to keep the loan on it, and I would just assume and start making those payments. I didn't actually assume the loan. We used a servicing company, and we would just make the loan payments. But we were able to buy it by putting the property into trust, get them out of the property. They get a win. They're still on the hook, so like it's still reporting their credit and everything, but payments are made. And 2 years later, then we were able to sell that property with a nice profit, and at that point the bank got paid off, but the bank doesn't know, so you could use it for due on sale clauses. Here's another one, and I don't know whether you run into this too, but some counties, they charge taxes if you take a property out of a LLC, like Clark County where I live. You could put rental property into an LLC, but they tax you when you take it out. And so using a land trust actually avoids the transfer tax that the county charges. And I think they also have Docstamps in Florida. Are you aware of any others that are big ones?
Oh, yeah. There's Docstamps in Florida. You're paying 70 cents for every $500 of any leverage that you have, so the size of your mortgage. We've done the research in all 50 states over what transfers are exempt, and there's always an exemption. Well, everywhere except Arkansas, or Alabama, there's an exemption for moving property into a revocable grantor trust. And the reason for that is that the government has an interest in making it easy for people to put their property into their estate. When they pass away, it cuts down on court costs with people having to go through probate. It makes the transfer of assets to the next generation very, very easy. So there's often an exception for moving property to a revocable grantor trust where the grantor and the beneficiary are the same party. So that's exactly what the land trusts that we draft are. And then after the fact, you're assigning the beneficial interest to the LLC for that liability protection, but the ultimate owner is the same. So you're able to avoid transfer taxes. And not only that, but the county isn't alerted to any change in ownership. So they're not jacking up your property taxes either.
Yeah. So if I'm a real estate investor and I have 10 properties, I can put them in 10 different land trusts, which means there's 10 different names. I can use a third party as a trustee. Let's say that I use a anonymous entity out of Wyoming. People say you can't do that. Actually, you can. All 50 states. Sorry. And then you assign that beneficial interest to something else. Nobody sees that assignment. That stays in your file cabinet. It's not filed with any county. It's not. it's not a public record anywhere, so nobody could see it. So if somebody's looking at those properties, it's different names. Each property is in a different name. They don't see the LLC it's assigned to even. So it's really good for anonymity, really great for asset protection. And you can even do it on your your personal residence. You don't lose your 121 exclusion. You don't lose your homesteads. You don't lose any of the benefits of having that property. Realistically, are there any downsides to using the land trust that you've encountered in doing this for umpteen years? And like just Anderson, we've done tens of thousands of these transactions. Like we have a pretty good data set. Have you seen any downsides to using the land trust?
Oh yeah, at Anderson, we've done 3,500 just in the first half of this year in terms of land trusts and property transfers. There can be downsides if you're very quick moving a trust and you're looking to get financing quickly. The trust is set up to be anonymous, and banks who are giving people large amounts of money tend to not want to do that unless they can clearly see that you own the property. So when people are looking to do a refinance, you're often removing the property from the trust, obtaining the refinance, and then either putting it back into the trust or setting up an entirely new trust to transfer the property to. The good news is that setting up a trust and transferring property in and out is very, very easy. So even though it does take a little bit more time because you're waiting for the county to record something, it can often be done all within the same refinance transaction. The bank can file all the deeds, the deed back, the to and from the trust. And so it is a little bit, if you're not prepared for that, and you're further along in your refinance process, then it can be a little bit stressful. But we like to make sure that our clients know that ahead of time so that we can make sure that we're planning and we have everything in place going into it.
How about the people that do like a series LLC or something? They say, I don't need a land trust. Is there a big reason? Is there a compelling reason why somebody under those circumstances would use a land trust? Or is it pretty much like, hey, it's a push?
It's why not though? Number one, there's often going to be a transfer tax. So if you've had the property for a very long time, or in states where the transfer tax is based on the size of the mortgage and it's highly leveraged, then the cost of the land trust is usually lower than paying that transfer tax. So sure, you could deed directly into the sale, but your property taxes could be jacked up. You'll pay a huge fee to the county, sometimes thousands of dollars. So why not use the land trust then? It doesn't make things that much more complicated once you've conceptually understand how the land trust works. In some states, I tell clients many times, even in Florida, where the Docstamp fee, even to and from, is based on the size of the mortgage, I'll do the math for them. I'll say, hey, your Docstamp fee is X number of dollars. The land trust is actually more expensive. So you should probably go ahead and just put it directly into the LLC. So we make it work for a client depending on their specific situation. But even with a series, when you're looking at the name of the series, it will say the name of the cell and also the name of the parent LLC. And if you've got it in a land trust, then you're just really cutting off any connection on the public record to that LLC. All that anyone sees from the public record is the name of the trust. So they don't even know about the LLC. They're not able to connect the dots in any way between multiple properties across your portfolio.
Yeah, I personally look at it and I say, hey, if you have debt, you're probably going to be using a land trust, period, because it's not that it prevents ever the trigger of the due on sale clause, but in 26 years and tens of thousands of transactions, we've never seen a due on sale clause triggered by the transfer into a trust. They're kind of like, there's actually the Garn St. Germain Act that says that protects the transfers into a revocable trust for your residence that you're going to be residing in, but the banks don't get in. They don't get that far. They just look at trust and they pretty much don't do anything. But if you're doing cash and you're just buying properties for cash and you have a system in place, you may go direct into the LLC, but it's like Amanda just said, you lose that anonymity. But if you're somebody who's perhaps you're buying properties, fixing them up, and you're selling, and you're flipping a lot of properties, and you're using a series, or you may not care. You're like, hey, there's a set period of time. But your point about the refinance is well taken, because it's gonna be whatever your entity is. They're probably going to make you take it out and put it into your name. Even if it's an LLC, that we have lenders that'll loan directly to it. But if you're just dealing with a traditional lender, they need to know that it's you. And so you end up taking it back out, putting it in your name to sign the documents, and then you transfer it right back in after.
Yep.
But you got to make sure that you're aware, because if you put it into a trust and then you go to refi, you're going to be kind of ticked off when they say, "Hey, you got to take it back out." You're
Yeah.
probably not going to be too pleased. Any other downsides to it? Let's get this a fair shake. Other than the cost, the expense, maybe a little bit of elbow grease. Is there any other downside that you've seen to using a land trust?
It is a lot more documentation. If you're not a very organized person, I guess, then these are private documents, they're contracts. You're not going to be able to go to the county and say, hey, I filed my land trust and I need a copy of this or that. So you do have to be organized and keep all of your originals. We're talking about wet signatures, notarizations. There's a little more legwork in terms of setting it up because we're dealing with real property. You can't just, it's not a normal contract where you can just sign it. When we're filing deeds, counties are often asking for trust agreements or certifications of trust. They need to see wet signatures. They need to see notarizations. Notarizations are relatively inexpensive. There's statutes that limit the amount a notary can charge, but the cost can go up a little bit if you've got a huge portfolio. But to me, that initial cost and that initial pain of setting things up is so outweighed by the peace of mind you have moving forward, knowing that you have that smoke screen, knowing that you have that anonymity, and knowing you have that asset protection.
I think that's a fair shake, and I think that you're being completely transparent about it, which I really appreciate. Is that, hey, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is I can get it out of my name. I can absolutely have anonymity. I can help defray and avoid any transfer taxes on, especially if there's mortgages on our property. In some cases, it's just the county transfer taxes. I can keep out of the public record even the LLCs that I'm associated with, which is fantastic, and nobody knows, how much stuff I have or how much stuff my LLC has. And there's a lot of anonymity that can be put into play if you know what you're doing with the land trust. Is it use it by itself? No, I think you're fair. That beneficiary is still liable, so you use an LLC in conjunction with it, and it's a really powerful tool. And all it really takes is a little bit of elbow grease, and you get a lot of protection. And so it's up to you as to determine whether or not it's worth it. Anything else about land trusts that we miss that you think would be important for a real estate investor to know?
I think one of the biggest questions or most important things that you need to understand when setting up your land trust is who should be the trustee. So the trustee is the person or entity who actually does end up on the public record. When a trustee takes title to the property, their name is listed. So if I'm your trustee, then it will say Amanda Wynalda, trustee of the 123 Main Street Trust. So it's really important who you have there. We have some clients who want to use a friend or family member, and I highly discourage that because, as I like to say, Google knows who you sat next to in the third grade. So anyone even remotely related to you, even if they don't have the same last name, it's going to be easy to connect those dots. At Anderson, we offer a nominee trustee service. So we have some attorneys who will use their name. They'll sign documents. They're available to sign transfer tax documents, things like that, to help get the exemption. And their name stays on title. Once the deed records, then they immediately resign, and you as the successor trustee then conduct business for that land trust moving forward. An alternative, and really the best way to do it, is to use a Wyoming holding company or a trustee LLC. These are super inexpensive to set up and maintain. I believe the annual fee in Wyoming is like $62. And then you're the sole member and the sole manager. So right from the get-go, you can start signing documents. You can open a bank account if you need to or want to. And you have control of the trust. At the same time, your name isn't on the public record.
Yeah, that's because Wyoming doesn't require disclosure of that. So you can have an anonymous LLC that's sitting there being the trustee. So it's ABC LLC, trustee of the 123 Main Street Trust, and your name's nowhere to be seen on that title, which keeps people from lawyers, snoops, and Uncle Sam from bugging you. Well, maybe not Uncle Sam, but definitely lawyers and snoops. Anything else? Because you've been a wealth of information today.
Well, I'm happy to. Yeah. Once you have the land trust set up, the second important thing is actually transferring the property into the trust. We've had a handful of clients, a number of clients who have us set up the trust and say, oh, I've done my own deeds, or I've got a local guy who does my deeds for me. And then they come back to us and say, hey, my name's showing up on the public record. And we take a look, we pull the deed, and it's like, well, you put your name or you put your address right there on the face of the deed. So you don't want to use your home address necessarily for property tax statements. That ends up on the public record on the assessor's website. You don't want to have your name listed there either. So you really, it's so sad really to work with a client through setting up a holding company, setting up an LLC, setting up a land trust, and then they just trip right there at the finish line and their name's all over the public record. So the deed is actually a really important part. The property transfer is a really important part that just puts that nice little bow on top of the land trust.
Yep. It's only worth it if you actually get the property in there, and then all those documents do not contain your name. Yeah, it doesn't help if you put it right on the cover page. Send this to Toby Mathis, and here's my personal address. Kind of undoes all the good that you just tried to do. So make sure that you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing and works with the real estate investors. Amanda, I'll put your information in the show notes, and we'll make sure that if somebody wants to get a hold of you, that they can. In the meantime, Anderson teaches a tax and asset protection event for free just about every other weekend, if not every weekend. We're doing them constantly, and one of the topics is land trusts, and you'll learn about LLCs and how real estate investors can use it. Amanda, you've been awesome today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Toby. It's been fun.